If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, I shall rank the sects in Vampire the Masquerade in what I consider to be the best and worst across all editions. The Anarchs, Camarilla and Sabbat, three opposing houses of vampires that have shaped much of the world of darkness into what we love and hate today. Political intrigue, sneaky backstabbing, and dank controversial lore defined these global factions with equally opposing views. There is no denying these facts, and their almost unchallenged strength in this story-driven game. But of course, they are not the only groups of vampires that pull the strings in the shadows, most of which have been covered on this very podcast. Fans across the years have debated which sects are the very best and which ones are the worst, and I'm here to settle it once and for all with this genre-defining list of my own that will decide which objectively is the worst sect and the best one and, well, everything else in between. But before we begin, I should point out a couple of things. Firstly, this list won't count the independent clans, which are the Settites, or Ministry as they are referred to in V5, the Ravnos, the Giovanni, and, technically speaking, the Gangrel. Some of these clans are more structured than others and act like such. They are ultimately just large clans, and it wouldn't be appropriate to mention them in this list. That said, the Hakata do have a place on this list. Secondly, I wish to add that all thoughts and opinions are my own, so if you disagree with something I have said, that is totally fine. It does not mean that you are right and I'm wrong, and vice versa. Number 8. The Independent Alliance. It wouldn't surprise me if you haven't heard of this sect, given its only inclusion is the Mind's Eye Theatre LARP books for Vampire the Masquerade. This sect consists of an alliance between the Giovanni and followers of Set, as a means of defense against the Sabbat, who focus their attention on the remaining independent clans, as those are those that are closest to their antediluvians. The Giovanni pull out of the promise of 1528 in 2008 and forge a new alliance in 2011 with the Settites in Las Vegas. They share their respective ancestral homelands in Venice and Egypt. The alliance affirms their independence of the Camarilla and Sabbat, but promises mutual protection and aid. And, well, that's it really. Despite being a rather interesting premise, one that I think is far more engaging than the Settites joining the Anarchs purely out of sheer desperation after being rejected by the Camarilla, there has never been any real development of the idea outside of the LARP core books, which is a shame. It is also incredibly difficult to put what is essentially a large tag team between two clans any higher than this. I rate this sect walk like an Egyptian Italian out of 10. Number 7. The Anarchs. Vampires that resent the status quo established by the paranoid boomers, elders of the Camarilla, the Anarchs stick it to the man, woman, and everything else in between. All that is needed is the Masquerade. The rest is tyranny in a twisted undead form. Poetic poise aside, the Unbound show no bounds when it comes to RP opportunities, both as friend and foe. I'll deal for newer players to get into the vampire's view of the world of darkness, both politically and supernaturally. Though, let's be real here. What do the Anarchs really got going for them? In the 20th century, they claim Los Angeles as their own free state, and you would have thought that other domains across the world would follow suit, but they haven't. There is no structure, no order, and very little else. Yes, I get that is the point. Yes, I know they can just be as awfully shrewd as the Camarilla, but I just find them terribly boring, and the freedom they offer to be uninspiring in most settings. The only plus I can give them at this point is that they finally broke away from the Camarilla proper. I rate this sect rage hard out of 10. Number 6. The Tamehe, the true Black Hand. Yes, my disdain and irritation with the movement is greater than my frustrations with the Tamehe. deal with it. Not to be confused with the Black Hand, the secret service of the Sabbat. The true Black Hand, or the Manus Nigrum, are an ancient death cult devoted to the worship of a cabal of beings known as the Avalu, whom it believed to be the antediluvians that slept in the ghost city of Enoch deep within the lands of the dead. They are said to secretly puppeteer the secrets against each other, having members of most VTM clans amongst their numbers, as well as mages, ghosts and wells, and even a few abominations. The premise of their existence is an interesting one to me, as well as their viewpoints and beliefs, offering a far more spiritual and supernatural outlook on the vampiric existence within the world of darkness. This is all surface level appreciation, mind you. Learning about the Tamehe and how everything in vampire lore is because they made it so, but all in secret, makes the world building of the game less interesting as a result, especially when you learn what they think about vicissitude. I rate this sect trench coats and katanas out of 10. Number 5. The Inconu. The Inconu are probably the closest thing you'll get to Bram Stoker's Count Dracula in a hidden castle in Transylvania without using Dracula himself. These secretive vampires are mostly Methuselahs who have detached themselves truly from the Jihad, the secret war amongst the sects, to hide and live in a castle in Eastern Europe that is protected by a big demon they formed a blood pact with, as you do. I can honestly relate to the sheer frustration of just packing up and leaving the rest of the community to squabble amongst themselves with their vague secret wars. Whilst filled with interesting lore and, ironically, political shenanigans of their own to deal with as they oversee and manipulate their lesser rivals, it is difficult to properly incorporate such a cluster of vampires into a modern, typical chronicle. The gulf between the goals of the average neonate player and the motives of the Inconu are incomprehensible. Unless you were to run a game with vampires pertaining to the sect, I find it to regularly include them. I rate this sect. I couldn't think of anything funny to say here, so this will have to do out of 10. Number 4. The Sabbat. Believers in the existence of the antediluvians and the self-appointed sword of Cain, the Sabbat reject the traditions entirely, seeing themselves above and beyond the cattle livestock that are the kind and kindred that oppose their warped and destructive ideologies, viewing themselves effectively as the superior beings. I have a love-hate relationship with this sect. I love and admire their warlike mentality of the sect and how they represent the inverted, bloody opposite of their immediate rivals, the Camarilla, the death games, and the cult-like rituals that make them stand out from practically anything else Vampire the Masquerade has to offer. What I hate is boringly predictable, unfortunately, which is just the edgy fans and childish banter that don't quite get the Sabbat. It is either bloodthirsty monsters that, mechanically speaking, are power gaming edgelords, or just are seen as vampires that want to commit diablerie all the time because apparently that's a fucking meme now. It's almost no surprise that World of Darkness HQ made the V5 Sabbat book a fucking joke to mirror the newer fans' appreciation of what is actually a very monstrous organisation of Cainites. I rate this sect, antagonist trademarked, out of 10. Number 3. The Hakata. Serving far more as a sect rather than an individual clan, the Hakata are the clans and bloodlines of death, the Cappadocians / Harbingers of Skull / Azur, the Lamie, Giovanni and their various revenant families, Samedi and the Nagaraja, the latter having no direct connection with any of them besides being able to wield necromancy. With them, they bring so much heated beef as the Giovanni's contract with the Cameroon is soon ending and the hatred the other bloodlines have towards them. There is plenty of culture to be had with each of the bloodlines, whether it is the Catholicism of the Cappadocians of old and the voodoo of the Samedi or the queer representation of the Lamia, he says jokingly. There are plenty of ways to portray them in games as either a player or ST, as the clans and bloodlines that make up the Hakata are dripping with lore and potential. And when you begin to incorporate Wraith of the Oblivion lore into the mix, with or without the Bahari flirtations with the Lamie, the world is your oyster when it comes to organic world building. I rate this sect, there's a ghost in my house. There's a ghost in my house. There's a ghost in my house. There's a ghost in my house out of 10. Number 2. The Ashira, another sect that newer fans may not have heard of, which is a little upsetting, especially when they play a significant role within the metaplot of the 5th edition, but given metaplot is a bad thing in the community now, I probably shouldn't say the M word anymore. The Ashira are a group of Islamic vampires. They declare their faith to Allah, rule in North Africa and Arabia. Much like the Camarilla they are so allied with now, they too are no strangers to their political maneuvers and power plays, though they are generally seen as less violent than their Western cousins. The mention of a different culture within the world of darkness may immediately put a lot of people's backs up, with good reason, but the write-ups of the Ashira throughout the years are actually some of the most sensitive and interesting material within the world of darkness. Each clan interprets the faith differently, rather than the inverse, by which I mean vampires do not influence the Islamic faith, the faith influences the vampire. It is a just and fascinating choice to me. What brings down the sect for me is more typical white folk gibberish, mainly the name of the Ashira clan variant names, which are absolute nonsense and cowardice to take the sect and do unique and respected elements with in various editions, and with the most recent changes in V5 material, I doubt we will learn anything about them anytime soon. I rate this sect Vermilion Wedding out of 10. Number 1. The Camarilla. I mean, if you didn't know this was going to be my number 1 choice, you're a muppet or very optimistic. The most organised of the sects are nothing more than an elite club of elderly snobs and thrive on the suffering of others and the traditions of old, making them no better than the rich cunts that jerk off to the ironclad grip of capitalism that keeps them healthily afloat. More poetic poise aside, I could waffle on about the backstabbing, the rules and customs they have, and the politics that they thrive on to survive, but I honestly don't think I need to. I have spent a large chunk of this podcast doing just that. They are the core in which the game exists. Without it, the game would not be anywhere near as interesting. Neither would be the need to tell stories of rising up to the greater foe, being shat on, and trying again. Without them, tabletop role-playing games in general would probably take a lot longer to emulate storytelling rather than just another cookie-cutter mold of wargaming scenarios. They are a darker, more sinister caricature of our world, drain the life force and blood of all they come in contact with, much like the rich in general actually. In short, they are the world of darkness. I rate this sect OK Boomer out of 10. And there is probably one of the more difficult ranking lists I've conjured to date, as there is plenty of grey areas to be had with all of these global factions of vampires, as it's the main 3, though mainly the Camarilla and the Sabbat, that get all the action. Nevertheless, I am curious to read what you think about the different sects, and why you think the Camarilla is the best one. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.